first of all, it sounds like you wanted concise statements, not really going into much detail, just kind of answer the question, period.
Yeah.
And then second of all, I typed mine up.
That's fine.
Is that okay if I continue to do that?
So chapter 2, I think I talked on Friday about we're going to really be looking at this very seemingly simplistic looking formula of gross pay minus all your deductions is net pay. And chapter 2 is going to help us with that top line. We're going to go take a look at what the Fair Labor Standards Act says about paying minimum wage and overtime and who's covered, what the specifics are, and then possibly today, if not today for sure on Wednesday, we'll start getting into some of the calculations. So domestic help, I don't know about you guys, I don't go home to a staff at night, but if you do, you may have babysitters, chefs, chauffeurs, things like that. Not very typical here in Western Montana. I have a sister-in-law and her family that lives in Manhattan, and that's very, very, very typical. Most of them will have nannies, drivers, higher echelon people. It's very, very, very common among staff, right? So, yeah, my staff is pretty much me and my husband. So what that looks like is that domestics, and if they work more than 8 hours a week for you or earn more than $2,000 in the calendar year, you have to comply with the Fair Labor Standards Act when you pay your domestics, okay? So that means minimum wage, that means overtime over 40 hours a week. That means you need to issue them a W-2. That means you need to pay into Social Security for them, right? It's a regular employee. Live-in domestics, so if you've got like a full-time live-in nanny in your home, they actually do not need to be paid overtime. But anybody that just say comes in the morning at 7 when you leave for work, takes care of your kiddos all day, makes dinner and leaves at 5 or 6 o'clock at night when you get home from work, they are need to be paid overtime. That's about all I have to say about that. It's a very violated law. There's a low level of compliance with this for a series of reasons. One of them being many, at least from listening to my sister-in-law talk, a lot of domestics are not legally documented to be working here. So with that comes the substandard pay, and I mean, it's just kind of a big mess, honestly. But this is what the law says, and if you're complying with the law, you are complying with the Fair Labor Standards Act as pertains to your any domestic help. Okay, minimum wage. Minimum wage, federal minimum wage is how much? $7.25 an hour. And what's Montana minimum wage? Yeah, it was $8.05 forever, and I think it just went up a dime, didn't it, last January? So it's $8.15 an hour. If a state's higher than the feds, you've got to pay the higher amount. In states where the amount's actually lower than the federal minimum wage, you've got to pay the higher amount out of the federal. Right? So then the question is, well, what's wages? Well, obviously, whatever your hourly wages is your wages, but there's a lot of other things that go into that calculation. For example, I pay you $4 an hour, but I pay you a commission. Okay? Am I violating the Fair Labor Standards Act? Well, it depends. If that commission gets you up for $7.25 an hour for the feds, $8.15 for Montana, then you're not. So what I'm saying is all of these things really need to be included when you're making that calculation. So what does minimum wage include? You're on a commission structure. You get paid per thing you sell, or per service you provide, or per referral you give somebody. Non-discretionary bonus. How do you think non-discretionary bonuses differ from discretionary bonuses? What does that mean?
Non-discretionary are not promised or agreed upon.
Non-discretionary actually are promised.
Or I'm sorry, yes, other way.
Other way around, exactly. So non-discretionary means they're contractual. In other words, every quarter, our labor contract, our labor union has negotiated with management that we get 2% of the net profits paid out collectively as all the employees. That's non-discretionary. Management can't look at the P&L and say, we don't have the cash to do this, right? Whereas the discretionary bonus is one which is not agreed upon or promised beforehand. So I look at my quarterly P&L and I say, wow, we had a really good quarter. I'm going to take 50 grand for myself as the owner of the company, and I'm going to spread 50 grand around amongst my employees. That's discretionary. Discretionary bonuses are not included in an employee's regular pay rate. You can't take those and plug them in and say, hey, this got them up to minimum wage, because they may or may not happen. So do you understand the difference? So if I give you a bunch of different pay types and say, are they complying with the Fair Labor Standards Act? When you're calculating gross pay to do that calculation of $8.15 in Montana or $7.25 for feds, you're going to include all the commissions, all the hourly base, all the non-discretionary bonuses, i.e. pre-promise or contractual, and then what's on-call or differential pay? On-call is?
On-call says you're getting a small amount, so you have like, you're falling on you, and it's on call, continue going, but then they get a lower rate for that.
Yeah.
Differential pay is you work the graveyard shift, so they pay you $1 more an hour than they do the day shift compensated for.
Exactly.
Crappy hours.
On call, you're carrying a beeper, you've got to be there in a moment's notice, what have you. Differential pay is that for shifts that are less desirable, they give you an extra couple bucks an hour. Okay. All that's included in minimum wage. Discretionary bonuses, the ones where I decide semester to semester, not included. So other kinds of compensation that's not included in regular rate of pay, gifts made as a reward for service. Thank you for just completing your second year. Here's a weekend at the Coeur d'Alene and 18 holes of golf. Okay, it's worth $400. Is that included? No. Is that W-2able? Does that kind of stuff show up on your W-2? Actually does. So it's not really a free trip to Coeur d'Alene, is it? Okay, we've got to tax on it. Payments for a bona fide profit sharing plan, I already gave that example of looking at your profit and loss. When I use the terms P&L, that means profit and loss. It's kind of what we call it in the business world, same as a, what did you guys call it in the accounting line? An income statement. Okay, a P&L is the same as an income statement. Vacation, holiday, sick day, jury duty pay, so none of those items, none of those compensation types are included in my calculation for minimum wage compliance. And then if I give you, 45 cents a mile for using your own car, or I compensate you for bringing your own tools if you're a mechanic, or I pay for your uniform, your scrubs if you work in a hospital, all those things show up on your paychecks, right, as money paid out to you, but they're not included in compensation. So, and that's an important distinction, again, because you've got to make sure that you're paying minimum wage. And some things are included in that number, and some things aren't. So this is really important that you know this. Okay, what's the difference? Anyone know the difference between minimum wage and living wage, or have you heard the term living wage? What does it mean?
A lot of people think that living wage is, or minimum wage has been keeping up with living wage, and that, especially in certain municipalities like Seattle, for instance, is going up to 15 over time, right? Because their cost of living is higher than surrounding areas.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So living wage is a concept that says what amount do you have to make on an hourly basis to survive in this specific area. And it's 100, 150 cities or something around the country have passed living wage ordinances. Now, people get really confused with this. Oh, does everybody have to pay a living wage? No. Living wage only pertains if you are a company that does business with the city government. So if I'm an asphalt company and I pour asphalt from Missoula County, I'm required to pay living wage to my guys and gals that work for my asphalt company. If I cater for town hall, I've got to pay my restaurant workers, my caterers, a living wage. If I'm Big Dipper ice cream, I don't have to pay a living wage because we have a living wage ordinance. It only pertains to companies that have contractual relationships with the city or the county. So why is everybody in such a hoo-ha about it then?
Slippery slope.
It's that stair step sort of effect. So if, say, there's only 2 companies in here that have contracts with the city, but if all of a sudden their wages start to go up, right, to comply with living wage ordinances, what happens on the pressure to everybody else's? Right, so upward pressure. So there's, from an economic standpoint, there's 2 sides to it. One side is obviously if you're the person making $8.15 an hour in Missoula, Montana, and trying to survive, you know, good luck on that. You're probably one of something with 30% of people here that have 2 jobs, right? Because that's what you need to do to survive on $8.15 an hour. So living wage, I think 2009, 2010, somewhere in there, we tried to pass a living wage ordinance in the city of Missoula, and it did not pass. There's a lot of outcry against it. But even back then, so this was like 7, 8 years ago, living wage was, I believe, $10.83 when they passed it, or when they were trying to pass it. So you have to imagine that now, particularly with our housing costs, the living wage has got to be up in Missoula, you know, around $12.50, $13 an hour, really, you know, realistically. Okay. So, but we don't have a living wage here, although you will see more and more. I deal obviously with a lot of business people. I place my, my students, and I have a lot of advisory board, blah, blah, blah. I know a lot of business people in Missoula, and many companies are very proud to publish and state that they pay a living wage. Okay, they don't want employees that are also have to be on food stamps. That doesn't reflect well on them as an employer, does it? And neither does it keep long-term employees. And you got the cost of turnover. Yeah, so that's basically what I have to say about that. There's also some weird exceptions from minimum wage. If you're a student under 20, in your first 90 days of employment, you can be paid $4.25. If you work full-time for like us, so say you work down in the kitchen in the culinary department, you're a full-time student, Institute of Higher Ed, farm, you can get paid 85% of minimum wage. Okay? So it's legal. And there's a complete list of sub-minimum wage exceptions on page 2-5. Okay, this is basically just what I said, law that attempts to keep low-wage workers' wages on track with cost of living. Okay, this is a little complicated, so stick with me here. So a tipped employee is somebody that regularly gets tips, like $30 a month in tips here. So you're a hairdresser, you're a bar back, you're a waitress, you're a massage therapist. You regularly get tips. Then you're considered a tipped employee. And then minimum wage is different from regular minimum wage. Now, it's not in Montana. In Montana, our tipped employees still have to make $8.15 an hour. Okay? It's only like 3 states that have that law. Everywhere else, all you have to make is something called minimum tip wage. And minimum tip wage is $2.13 an hour. Okay? But you have to prove as the employer that your employees still get federal minimum wage. What am I talking about?
Prove they're getting enough income to separate the.
Yeah. I'm only giving you $2.13 an hour, but I've also got to prove to the IRS and the Department of Labor and Industry that my customers are paying you the other $5.12 an hour, right, to get you the minimum wage, federal minimum wage. Okay, it's not so in Montana, but almost everywhere else it is. So, that $5.12 an hour, so let's pretend that I'm in Nevada. And I went to grad school in Northern Cal. I spent both of my summers in grad school working in South Lake Tahoe at Harrah's Casino, right? So, and I made $2.13 an hour, and this was in the late 80s. So that number has not shifted for 25 years, 30 years. Huh?
That explains a lot.
Yeah. So I mean, really, they have almost no obligation to pay their, when you think about $2 an hour. Anyways, so they got what was called a tip credit for that balance, but they had to prove that they earned or had a right to that full tip credit. In other words, I had to show that I got tips for the balance. Now, in 1987 and 1988, when I was going to grad school, debit cards didn't exist. Very few people even paid with a credit card. Everything was done on paper, wasn't it? So we'd have to turn in this piece of paper called a 4070 that would line out how much tips you needed. Right? Now, something like 85% of all bar and restaurant charges are paid for digitally. So it's very easy to track. And also, if you work in a bar or restaurant or casino, you know that you can't check out at night until you put your tips in, right? So they've got that digital recording of your tips. So that's what the employer uses to make sure that you're paying it. Now, so just go over this first of all, because we're going to just focus on federal for a second. So an employee has to make $7.25 an hour when combining his or her tips and wages. So you have to have a minimum weekly gross of $290. Here's, where it gets tricky though. What are taxes taken out of? Are they taken out of the $2.13 an hour or the $7.25 an hour? The full $7.25. But how does the employer get taxes out of money that you've taken off the tables and put into your pocket? You see what I'm asking? I'm only cutting you a check for $2.13 an hour, but I really need to take taxes on $7.25 an hour, or maybe $37.25 an hour if you work for a really nice place where you're making 20, 30, 40 bucks an hour, 10 a bar. Where do I get that money as the employer? Is your paycheck big enough to absorb that?
In some cases, probably not.
It's not even close in some cases. I mean, back when at Harrah's, the guys and gals that were dealing on the big tables, the craps tables, and some of the special roulette rooms, I mean, even back then they were making a drink a night, on tips. So what does an employee have to do if you're a minimum tipped, or a minimum, you're being paid minimum tip wages of $2.13 an hour, but you're really making $3,000 a week?
Sounds like that's what we get.
You're going to have to make quarterly estimated payments. Is anybody familiar with that concept? Every quarter, you're going to have to complete something called a 1040 ES and send money to the IRS, right? Because if I'm making, I think maybe I've got an example up here. If I'm making 20 bucks an hour and I'm only getting paid $2.13 an hour, there's not enough money to cover all my taxes, right? Because what percentage am I going to have to pay? What's one tax you know that I'm going to have to pay? One more time? Yeah. And you guys don't know the rate schedule, but let's say in my example, I said I'm making a couple grand a week. That's $104,000 a year. I'm going to be, my top earnings is going to be in the 28% bracket. What else do I have to pay? Mm-hmm. And how much is that?
6.2.
That is,
Sorry, 1%.
yeah.
6.2 is OASDI.
Yeah.
Okay, and again, we call OASDI, lay people call it Social Security, lay people call HI Medicare. Yeah. Now, this obviously isn't state taxes, this is just my payment to the IRS. So 7.65. Right, so that money I'm throwing in my pocket every night. And this is a real lesson, which I mean, those 2 summers I worked at Harris, I was a business student, so we knew this. But everyone else is like, oh, I'm rich. You gotta take, that $200 you just pocketed tonight, you've got to put 35.65% of it in a bank account, savings account, so when it comes time to make your quarterly payment, you've got the money.
So you have to make a separate payment to your employer for their half, or are they gonna just take?
They've got to pay
Right, those two. But if
their matching portion of this.
Yeah, but say it doesn't fall in the 213.
No, they've got to pay 7.65 of your total. So if I'm paying you guys $2.13 an hour, and then say you report your tips to me for a week, and you say I made $400 in tips, and you worked a 40-hour week, right? That's $10 an hour in tips. And this is my minimum tip wage. Then I, as the employer, have got to pay 7.65 of $12.13 an hour. Right? And so do you. And then we both pay 7.65 of this. Does that make sense? Tell you, working for a tipped employer gets tricky. Or I mean, processing payroll for somebody that has tipped employees gets tricky. That's why now really basically, it used to always be really a struggle to get the tips out of people. I can't pay you till you give me your tips for the week. And like I said back, way back when, it was like, we just kept them in little notebooks. You'd write down every night what you made, Now with the systems, you can't check out your number, or cash out for the night until you've entered your tips.
I've seen a lot of numbers got fudged that way.
Yeah, and they still do. And I'll explain a little bit more why. But can you see up here in any situation why an employer would encourage you to underreport tips? Why? Yeah, I mean, 7.65, all they need you to show is that you made another $5.12 an hour, right? To get you to 7.25, because otherwise they're violating minimum wage law. Or there's another caveat, well, this is kind of complicated. If you're what's called a large employer, in other words, you have 10 or more employees, everybody has to report at least 8% of their gross sales as tips. So if I temp bar at the depot and I push $5,000 of food and booze across the bar tonight, or in a week, I've got to report at least $400 in tips, 5,000 times 8%. And the depot has to ensure that I'm doing that. Right? And that number really hasn't changed for a while. It probably should go up because I think forever tips were 15%, and now I think they've kind of moved up closer to 20%. So 8% is a pretty low number. Right? And you'll hear employers, and this is totally not true, you'll hear employers saying, all you have to report is 8%. No, what you have to report is what you received. And 8% probably isn't going to cut it if most of your customers pay with a credit card. Because all they have to do is go back and pull a digital record, right? And in most cases, it's going to be more than 8%.
Yeah, I know when I worked for tips, basically, we were forced to claim all of the tips that were digital. And then they said, as a rule of thumb, just claim 10% of what you made cash. And that was widely accepted among other waitresses.
Yeah,
Everybody.
yeah, and that's probably a good staying out of trouble strategy.
Right.
Although it really is against the law.
Right.
You really got to report what you make. So this is just showing, so this gal, this is showing overtime. Okay, so just to back up as I probably look at these stats. So the Fair Labor Standards Act says that anything over 40 hours in a week, I have to pay you what?
Okay.
1.5 times your regular rate, correct? So in this example, this gal works 47 hours at Christchurch Bar. She's a tipped employee. She averages $750 in tips, and her employer takes the maximum tip credit. How much, the question is, how much is her gross pay? So the first 40 hours, I pay her minimum tip wage, right? $2.30 an hour, 13 cents an hour. Then in the last 7 hours, now she's over minimum or over 40 hours, I've got to pay her time and a half, right? Which is what the $10.88 is. But I still get the tip credit. I still get the tip credit of $5.12 an hour. Do you want me to put up an example, one of these, see if you can run this calculation? Okay. Let's do that. And let me see, just give me a second here. I'm trying to figure out if I can use this document reader so that we can capture it. So let's say you can start writing this down. Let's say that I worked, can you guys see this? 46.5 hours. And I made $411 in tips. And let's say I'm in Ohio, it's an Ohio employer. So the question is, what's my gross pay? Okay. Do you feel like you can try and work this on your own and we go over it? Tipped employee. Yeah, I'm a tipped employee.
So the maximum credit.
You always assume that, well, you've got to figure out first off, did they make minimum wage? That's your first question. Did I make minimum wage? If I didn't make minimum wage, then I got other issues. So do you understand the calculation I've got here? The first 40 hours, they tell me, the law tells me that I can pay $2.13 an hour if their tips get them to 7 1/4. And I didn't even have to run a number on this because I can see it's plenty big enough to get me to $7.25 an hour, right? So I made that over 46.5 hours. It's about $9 an hour. So the first 40 hours, I've got to pay them, I think this equals $85.20, right? Plus, Then it's 1088 minus 512. Where does 1088 come from? That's minimum wage times 1.5. So anything over 40 hours, I know I've got to pay you that. But I still get the tip credit, right? So out of pocket, after 40 hours, I've got to make sure I'm paying you $5.76 an hour, correct? And that's for that next 6.5 hours. So 37.44 plus 85.20. Your gross paycheck's going to be 122.64. Y'all see that? That worked today. That was really snappy. I like this. It's better than the board because it's harder to see with the glare, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it isn't captured on the recording. So if you miss class, you want to go back and see something, what's on the board isn't captured. So that's cool. I like this. It's taken me like 4 times in this room to kind of figure out how to make it work. Does anybody have questions on this? How would these numbers change if you were, say you were in Hawaii and their minimum wage is $9 an hour? Your tip credit would go up, right? So you would have to take $9 minus an increased tip credit to get to the 213, and then it would be, instead of 1088, it would be 1350. It would be $9 times 1.5. Yes, sir. 46 and a half hour week. So anything over 40 hours. Yep, those are the hours.
Okay.
6.5 hours. Yeah.
What percentage of minimum wage is it that, what percentage is set or?
I don't know that it's a percentage. Like I said, that $2.13 an hour when I was waiting tables and bartending in the 80s, it was the same number.
Yeah.
So it hasn't changed. It's just an, you know what it was? Back then, minimum wage was $4.25. That's what it was. All the time, the whole time I was in college and grad school and bartending, minimum wage was $4.25.
How do you get it now?
Because it's a very powerful lobby. The bar and restaurant lobby is very powerful. Yeah, it was 50% of minimum wage. That's where the number came from.
Yeah, that just doesn't even seem right, does it?
But not really that, especially when you're a casino doing, say, a couple billion a year in revenue. With that said, it's a very fine living if you can stand the atmosphere, because the tips are great. Okay. So then here's some examples. So in the first example, I'm not working in a casino. I'm working at a coffee shop in Potomac. And people, the farmers up there are still living a quarter under their coffee cup. So at the end of the week, I got $43 in tips. What's my employer worried about at the coffee shop? Yeah, minimum wage. And again, Montana, not a great example. So let's say we're in a little farm town in Idaho. So my question is the $85.20 that the employer at the coffee shop in Idaho is paying, plus $43, does that come to $290? Does anyone remember where the $290 comes from? That's $725 times 40, right? Did I get to my $290? No. So can the employer just pay me $85.20? No. They've got to pay me an additional, they've got to pay me $247, not $85.20. Everybody see that? When we do calculations, if there's anything that loses you in the math, do not be shy. Do not feel like, oh, I don't get it and everyone else does, because honestly, there's kind of a lot, so make sure you clarify. Does everybody see this one? Okay, so then the next example, now I am working, at the Mirage in Vegas or something, and I made $1,189. Well, obviously, I'm over $290. My employer just paid me $85.20, but am I even going to get a paycheck? Why not? Why am I not going to get a paycheck? I made $11.89, right, in tips. Oops. Sorry, I got to get proficient with this here. So I made $11.89 in tips. I made $85.20 in wages, right? So what is that? $1274.20 times whatever my tax rates are, right? 7.65 for Social Security and HI, and maybe another 15% for income tax. So obviously, say I'm taking 22% of that number, that's around $300. My wages aren't enough to absorb it, are they? So in that case, what am I going to have to tell my waitress? My cocktail waitress? You've got to do quarterly payments. Is that my obligation as the employer to make sure she does that then? No. I've got to get my 7.65% to the IRS. But, the reality is it's her personal tax situation, isn't it? Okay, are you happy moving on from this, or do you want to do one more example? Yay or nay? Bye. Okay. Okay, work weeks. This seems pretty self-evident, but the Fair Labor Standards Act doesn't want employers jacking around with work weeks. Like 1 week is Wednesday through Tuesday, and the next is Saturday through Friday to get up from underneath overtime. So what the FLSA says is that you've got to have 7 consecutive days, you've got to publish it, you've got to keep your work week the same, right, so that you're not getting out from underneath paying overtime. And then in some states, like California, for example, it's not just a 40-hour work week, it's an 8-hour work day, and you've got to be paid overtime, right? So that really messes with like 410s. My son's fiance is a nurse in San Francisco, and she works 3/12s. And they have to pay her overtime for 4 hours a day to do that. But we don't have that in Montana. Can an employer require an employee to work overtime? Yes. Yeah, you can. Absolutely. Particularly, you can. You see it most common in industries where it's cyclical, and then there's like due dates, like publishing industry or something. And there's some exceptions. In hospitals, the overtime for, she's a California employee, so that was not a great example here, but the 40 hours a week turns to 80 hours in 2 weeks before you have to pay hospital employees overtime. This is Fair Labor Standards Act. Retail and service industries that are going to get commission, there's some very, very few exceptions to the 40 hours a week. Really, generally for our purposes, the rule is more than 40 hours a week, you've got to pay overtime, with a very few exceptions. Comp time. Have you ever heard this expression? Okay, it's really a misunderstood and misused concept. You can only grant comp time if there's these very few situations. In other words, if you're an hourly employee that's not exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act, and you work for me, say we are a magazine publisher, and this week there's not a lot going on, so I'm like, okay, you can take Friday off, so you work a 32-hour week, right? But then next week it's game on, and I ask you to work an extra day. Can I do that and just kind of even them out, say, well, you got comp time last week, so now I'm requiring an additional 8 hours? Absolutely not. That violates the Fair Labor Standards Act. Comp time is not, I hear people use it all the time, comp time. It's not even a concept, or it's not a legal concept for anything other than very, very few exceptions. Primarily the one being, like right now, all of our firefighters are earning, a shit ton of comp time, right? Emergency responders, public health responders can earn comp time. Because when they're working, they're required to be on so many hours. But that's not a concept for, say, an accounting firm or a magazine publisher. If somebody works over 40 hours, you have to pay them if they're a non-exempt employee. Which brings me to this concept. If there's one thing you take away from this chapter, it's this right here. So everybody, and it's not like whatever your boss feels like labeling you, it's every job everywhere has got the same set of standards apply to them, and every job is either an exempt job or a non-exempt job, and it really should be right in your job description. And what that means is, fill in the blank, I am exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act. The overtime provisions of the Fair Labor Standards Act. Or I am not exempt from the overtime provisions of the FLSA. That's what it means. And it's very rigid guidelines in the FLSA that tells us whether you're exempt or non-exempt. And it's not you personally, it's your job, it's the job description. So, who's exempt and who's non-exempt? You are exempt if, and you should be very conversant with figure 2.2. You are exempt if you are an executive, administrator, or professional. And there's very clear guidelines that identify what those are. You've got higher education associated with your job. 40% or more of your job is discretionary, meaning you get to make up your own mind how you do it, right? You hire and fire. You have to do continuing professional education to keep your credentials current. I mean, I'm just kind of spewing off some of them. But there's a caveat that define each of these three categories. In other words, I can't hire you until you answer my phone and keep my appointments and go to the bank once a day. And I hire you and call you my chief executive administrator. No, because you don't have 40% discretionary ability. You don't hire and fire. You didn't need a higher degree to get the job. So it's not what the job title is, because you can call anybody whatever you want. It's, do they meet the caveats of FLSA? Additionally, business owners, highly compensated employees, computer and creative professionals are exempt, and outside salespeople. Now, right as Obama was leaving office, and this was something that he was a big believer in, is there was a lot of mid-level managers, right, making 40 grand a year, that were non-exempt. So, and think big box store managers, right? So you're working 70 hours a week at Best Buy or Walmart or whatever, but you're not, but you're exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act. In other words, you weren't getting paid overtime. Okay? Right as Obama was leaving office, that salary said everybody under $913 a week, $913 a week in those positions have got to be paid overtime. That has since been, I don't know, overturned or stalled, I guess. There's a Supreme Court case. And of course, there's a lot of pressure on the current administration to drop it. They don't, corporations don't want to have to pay their mid-level managers overtime for the 70, 80 hours a week they're going to have it. So we'll leave off there. Please look at figure 2.2. Go ahead and read chapter 2, and then you prepare the acronym quiz and the tax table quiz is from chapters 1 and 2, so any acronyms are fair game. You won't have to do them all, I'll give you like a laundry list and don't pick half of them or something.
How about, for instance, like using legislation under ACA?
Yeah, I don't think any of that. I couldn't pull it, so. All
I
right.
think about have you on that then. I will. Have a good day, Amanda.
Bye.